Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. This is another Monday with the Wizard's Box, and it is the 27th of June, 2022. And we're going to be having our very first section of Ask Me Anything. And anything is a question, not a consult. And this is something that we're going to be making a very clear difference because of a number of issues that have come up. First of all, a question is something that will benefit the entire group. It's something that it's general about either the implementation of the diet or, some preparation of, food preparation information, or some things like that, that could really benefit everybody. Whereas a personal consult starts with something like, I have diabetes or vulvodynia or this or that, and my labs say this and my labs say that. And it's very, very specific in nature and not necessarily transferable as knowledge to somebody else. And the reason why we're going to be making that very clear distinction between what represents a question, what represents a consult, is because a consult by nature is individual and requires, a knowledge of the entire history of this particular person, their lab information, and also carries, of course, it would carry like it would need a professional, a clinical intervention that also carries liability. Facebook and YouTube are not the correct venues for solving a consult. So basically, we just want to make that very clear. I think it's important for everybody to be able to use this forum to clear a lot of those questions that would allow us to make us the better decisions and to be able to implement this incredibly healing diet in the best possible way, but without, having to feel that you're not listened to because you are proposing a consult. Okay, so welcome everybody, and I'm Patricia de la Garza. I just started like that. I've been doing this diet for about 18 years, and I'm here with my fellow wizards, Monique Attinger, and Carla Wiersma, and of course, Susan Owens. So Monique, do you want to go with the next point?
Okay, we still have some people coming in, so if I get a little distracted, it's because I'm still approving people as they arrive in our
can
meeting.
be a co-host, and I can do that if you want.
Okay, let's do that.
So we have already some questions sent through the group. And I think we have two questions that are going to be really, really interesting. Cover this description of what we say it's a question. So we'll be having a very, very interesting conversation today.
Yes.
All yours.
So I've just made you the meeting host, Patricia, so I'll leave that to you for now. But the one thing that I want to deal with as we launch into doing these weekly seminars is that it's really important that everybody understand that what we're here to help you with is education. So again, in the sort of same vein as talking about questions versus consults, we also need to be clear that this is not representing a therapeutic relationship with you. We assume that you're under the care of a doctor and that someone, a trusted health professional, is helping you to track what's going on with your health. What we want to do here is give you information, educate you so you can understand what the benefits of this diet can be, how to work with it, and how it might help you. But we can't say for sure that this diet is going to be your silver bullet. We can't say for sure that we know exactly how this diet will impact you. What we can say is what we know in general, and also from our own personal experience. So we're going to share with you our personal experiences with working with the diet, with doing the diet ourselves, with having lived with it for, in all of us cases, we've been doing this for more than a decade with each of our respective families. So this is about helping you to understand more about oxalate, more about how to work with the diet, how it will be potentially part of what might help you, but purely from an educational standpoint, and it's very important for you to be monitored and tracked by a trusted health professional. So with that said,
next point is Carla.
I don't know that I have really too much to add that hasn't already been said, other than, just to reiterate it, what has worked for my family and me is not going to be, or may not be, the same as, for everybody else, because we're all coming into it with, different conditions, different situations. So, like Monique and Patricia have said, it's basically educational, and, just understand that, it's not one size fits all. What works and has worked for me and my family may not work for you, and that's, it's all good.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that we're going to be sharing with you is that there is the possibility for personal consults, but those personal consults are personal, have a professional relationship attached to it, and also a cost. So Monique Attinger, she is a nutritionist, and she's working out of Canada. So she will be able to do that work, and that following up of your diet, creating a diet plan, adapting to your specific needs, and doing all that day-to-day follow-up. And she's doing a great job. I've been following some of her clients as well, and it's been a fantastic experience. So if you're looking more into having your oat deciphered and taken out in all its glory, and see everything that is happening and how the things are working in relationship to one another, and in the whole context of your own personal metabolism, then the person to go to is Susan Owens. And Susan Owens is also giving personalized consults. And we're going to give you in the comments in the YouTube, and at the end of this, like a little sheet where you can get all the contact for each one of us. So in the case of Carla will be taking consults in the near future once her PhD diploma is hanging on the wall. So for the time being, we're just waiting anxiously for that to happen. So Carla is not taking consults at this time. And if you have some behavioral issues, especially with kids on the spectrum, and if you have, like picky eaters, and adapting the diet and doing all those things, I might be able to help you. So we're going to be giving you all that information, but this is our day to ask me anything. So the first question is a milligram of oxalate a milligram of oxalate? That means if you have a milligram of rhubarb, or if you have a milligram of, I don't know, cantaloupe or whatever, is that the same, or would it be different? Or whether it comes from one source or another, does that make a difference? That was one of our first questions. So Monique, do you want to grab it?
Sure. The thing about oxalate is this. Oxalate is in plant foods, as we've talked about before, and it can be in two forms. It can be soluble or insoluble. Soluble oxalate is the kind that's most likely to be absorbed, but it's not the only kind that can be absorbed. Insoluble can be absorbed as well. And so really what we want you to do is, we know that you see all kinds of data on our spreadsheet. We know that it says how much is soluble and how much is insoluble, but because the potential remains that you could absorb from both those kinds of oxalate, please treat total oxalate as the oxalate that's in a food. So it's possible that we can avoid absorbing some of the insoluble oxalate, but that it doesn't mean it's not still causing you some problems. So insoluble oxalate can be present in foods in crystals, and those crystals, as they're passing through your gut, can be contributed to gut inflammation and things like leaky gut. And if you do have leaky gut, if you've got insoluble oxalate, like something like calcium oxalate, you could have that passing through the tight junctions, which are not as tight as they should be when the gut's leaky. So treat that total oxalate number as the number. And if you want to do something fancy later on, when you're further along in the diet, perhaps you might want to consider how much soluble versus insoluble oxalate. But really, your starting position should be total oxalate is what you're tracking.
Yeah, and also a milligram of oxalate is a milligram of oxalate. Whether it comes from one food or the other, it's really like counting calories. When we're counting oxalates, it's like counting calories. So, you know, a milligram is a milligram. But just remember that some of the foods are so incredibly high that even a tiny bit is a whole lot. So just make sure that your levels are going down, that they're going down slowly, and that you're respecting the capacity that your body has to excrete these things. And many times, I think, especially at the beginning, when we were starting this diet and this journey from very, very high oxalate diets. So in my case, we were following the specific carbohydrate diet for autism, and we were doing the pecan bread and the almond bread and the, you know, oh my gosh, all of them. We were doing all those things. We were extremely high. We were eating spinach every day before Susan rescued us and said, well, you might look into oxalates. And we didn't know we needed to go slowly at that time. I mean, we didn't realize how important it was to go as slowly as we are proposing right now. And we had some pretty severe dumps. And now I think after all this experience, it's probably the easiest to start targeting like your highest oxalate food and just start cutting very, very slowly the portion size of that highest oxalate food. And then you start compensating with other things. And then once you get the really crazy highs out of the diet, then you can start, you know, reducing all over the place. Don't fall for the all or nothing. Oh, I'm eating a lot of green smoothies, and so I'm going to cut them off, because you're all of a sudden you're cutting off 80% of your oxalate intake, and you're doing it from one day to the other. Your body needs to adjust. You have to remember, one of the things that really helps me in the way I think about the diet is really the fact that health is all about balance. So if you think that's balanced if you move it either in the good way or the bad way, you're taking it off of balance. So you don't want to go really aggressive. You want to start improving your health while maintaining that balance as you go. Well, as you go down, actually, not up. But that's just my take on it. I don't know if somebody else has something to add. Oh, Susan has something to add. Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to kind of clarify that there are ways that you can have a leakier gut so that you get more of the food oxalate into your body. And that is by the way oxalate gets in is through those little junctions between our cells. And so this is the absorptive surface. It doesn't go that way. It goes through between the cells. That's called paracellular, para around, cellular, the cell transport. And so there, we do know that there are some environmental things, including food, that can increase that. And one of the things that has had a lot of research by a scientist named Alessio Fasano is that there is a peptide in gluten, which is, in wheat and barley and rye, that can open up those junctions. And so that would mean, regardless of how much you're eating, you're going to get a higher proportion of it getting through. Okay. And then also oxalate itself, those junctions are zipped together with calcium. Okay. And so oxalate is something that binds calcium. So you actually, by having a higher oxalate diet, you can make it where you absorb a higher proportion of that high oxalate diet. And I do want to emphasize that going slow is so important because I've heard some terrible stories from people who did not pay attention to that, and they ended up in the hospital. And I even had somebody this week, and it's very, very serious what's happening with that woman. So we do not want that to happen to anybody. Go slow.
Yeah, that's the message. Absolutely. So we need to, so we're going to continue with another question. And I think this one's a really good one. It's from Ruben G here in the group. And it says, should anybody with a good health and with no symptoms be concerned about oxalate? Should that person restrict oxalate in his or her diet? And well, I think we all have an opinion. I don't know. Raise your hand, wizards. Who wants to go first?
I'll be happy to jump in. What I'd say is, if you have good health, oxalate's still not good for you. It's a known human toxin. It can poison you in sufficient dose. When I was a kid, everybody in my area had a backyard rhubarb plant. Everybody knew don't chew the leaves. Why? Enough oxalate in the leaf to make you really good and sick without, without even consuming that much of it. So we understood that there was some risk there, and it turns out that what's in a rhubarb leaf is oxalate. And so what I would say is those highest oxalate foods, I would probably limit my intake of them to dodge a bullet, because as you're eating a lot of high oxalate food, it can be slowly, and I'm going to use the word relentlessly, building up in your system. And so what's causing us the difficulty when we dump is not the current oxalate that we're eating. It's the oxalate that's in our tissues that has become stranded there over time, which is causing us the problem when we dump. That oxalate's moving out of the tissues in a wave into the bloodstream, and then all of a sudden the body has to mobilize to be able to deal with it. And sometimes we've got a lot of it stored, and so we can be really causing ourselves a lot of difficulties because that oxalate can trigger pain, inflammation, symptoms. So if you've got really good health, that's wonderful. Maybe you don't have to worry as much about oxalate as somebody else, but I would certainly look at the really big heavy hitters: spinach, beets, chard, almonds, most of your nuts, a lot of the
Cashews.
cashews.
Chocolate.
Oh gosh. And so a lot of these really heavy hitters where you're looking at, maybe there's a milligram of oxalate per gram of the substance. We're not talking about little bits. Oh, and rhubarb is an overachiever here. So, things like this, maybe you don't eat them because you don't want to end up slowly and relentlessly developing chronic pain and inflammation over time. Okay, and I'll quit. I'll get off my soapbox now. Who's next?
Okay, go Carla.
I would have to agree. At least in the sense that they wouldn't be a regular part of my diet. Maybe it's something to have on occasion, but a rare occasion. I would say oxalate is something that it's probably best to be very cognizant of. So, occasionally, if you want to have, a little bit of spinach, make it very rarely and small, because a little goes a long way. The one thing that I tell people is you don't accumulate it overnight, it's not coming out overnight. So that's probably the best reason to go slow is, it's not an elimination or a true elimination diet. It took years to accumulate that oxalate. It's probably going to take years to get rid of it.
Yes, Susan.
I just want to say that it seems that there is some sort of addictive quality to oxalate, because people who do not know anything about the oxalate content of anything will start eating one high oxalate food, and then suddenly they crave more high oxalate foods. And gradually, over maybe 6 months or a year, you will look at the shift in their diet, and suddenly everything that they're eating is high oxalate. And so this is how some people get in trouble with that. And then I also want to say that the normal way our bodies deal with oxalate is not through human biology. It's not in our genes to handle oxalate. It is in the microbial genes and it's thiamine dependent. And so that's vitamin B1. So we need the microbes that we get from our mother in the birth canal and from breast milk. And if you have had a history of, like you had a C-section and your mother didn't breastfeed you, or if right after you were born, you were given a lot of antibiotics, those are the reasons. If you've had a history of a lot of antibiotics, there is more of a chance that you're going to be stuck with the oxalate that you're eating. And so if that is not in your history, then you are more likely to be able to tolerate more oxalate than other people. And so you have to really be careful and look at your own personal history on that score.
Yeah. And, just to conclude, I think it's really important to see that all of us, started because of somebody else's oxalate problem. And it was not in our radar that we were having any type of symptoms or illnesses or things like that. But in the way that we all experienced it, when we made the decision to go low oxalate to help that particular loved one, in the case of Monique, her daughter, in the case of Carla, her son, in the case of Susan, her daughter, and for me as well with my daughter, When we started taking a look at that and we took a decision as a family, one of the comments that were coming back often in those first conversations is like, oh my God, I am dumping as well. I'm feeling so much better. My digestion is so much better. We were not the ones that were the reason for the diet, and yet we all felt the benefits from it. So just taken from that very basic personal experience, I would say, I would recommend to anybody, to just start looking out for it and just don't exaggerate. If you look at the history of how we ate, I'm just, spinach was available maybe 2-3 weeks a year. We were not supposed to eat, green smoothies in January. And it was just not part of who we were. So I think it's a very good idea and very smart of somebody who is looking into this oxalate story to just be cautious. It is a toxin, it accumulates. And when you're not burdened by it, you feel a lot better.
And while it accumulates, if you do not have gut bacteria who are breaking it down the way Susan was mentioning, then your body has to excrete it. This is not a detox situation. This is straight ahead excretion. And so, if you're exceeding your body's ability to excrete it, then it is accumulating. And that's a silent time bomb. I had no idea that I had illnesses that were related to oxalate. And for us, the crazy thing was I took my diet down so I could model it to my daughter, and we started to feel better. And I was following the kinds of research and so on that Susan was doing and posting about back in the Yahoo group days, and eventually discovered it was related to things like asthma and allergies. And I had a son who had asthma and allergies, and son of a gun, I dropped the oxalate in his diet. And didn't he start to do better? And didn't he not need his puffer anymore? So all kinds of things that we might not associate with oxalate, because people who know about it oxalate kidney stones. That's kind of the equation. But it can be behind pain, inflammation, and conditions which don't look like kidney stones.
Absolutely. Yeah. Susan.
When our project started, which was 17 years ago, I went to 7 oxalate conferences. And what I noticed when I got there is, where is everybody else? The only people that were the scientists attending these conferences were kidney stone doctors. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I was coming from a basic science side. So I knew that oxalate goes all over the body. And so I expected there to be people from every discipline there, and they simply were not there. And so that field got very ingrown in just people looking at kidney stones. Now, if you think about it, why do they get in trouble? Because they're doing a really good job secreting oxalate through the kidneys. And that's why it's concentrated in the kidneys. But those of us who maybe don't secrete well, and instead we retain a lot of our oxalate, that we're the ones that are going to have oxalate having consequences in the rest of the body. And so it really may be, we don't really have good solid research, because at this point, the only research that's being funded is kidney stone research, okay? So until we can overcome that barrier, we're not going to have a lot of studies that can contrast one group with the other group. But it kind of looks a bit like it's going to be 2 different groups, and that there's the good secretors through the kidney that do have more tendency to the kidney issues, and then the people who have more all over your body issues.
Exactly. So we have another question here, which is a really good question. I think it could take us, a long time just go through the whole thing, but I think it's going to be really interesting. This one was by Heather Solimin, and basically it says specifically for each mineral supplement, does it cause helpful binding, safely ushering oxalates out via bowel or bladder? Or does it cause oxalate liberation, mobilization, creating dumping? So, and she's asking specifically about magnesium citrate, calcium citrate, sodium bicarbonate, potassium bicarbonate, and potassium citrate. So she's following in the heavy metal realm. There's a big difference between liberating, mobilizing metals and binding them to usher them out. It seems oxalates have a similar dynamic. If I am dumping too much too fast, I don't want to take minerals that increase dumping. I want to bind them to lessen the detox burden. It would really be helpful to go through the list above and any other minerals that play a particular role in the oxalate releasing process and label them so that we know which to reach for.
Okay. Oh, did you want to say something, Lenny?
No, go ahead, Susan.
Okay, oxalate has two strong negative charges, and that is why it binds positively charged ions, okay? And so that would be your standard minerals that people are talking about, like calcium and magnesium and zinc and iron and copper and all of those things. Now, we know it binds all of them, but it matters in a compartment in your body in a particular place. What's there? Does it have a high level of calcium there, or does it have a high level of something else there? And so it's very part of your body dependent. And the idea that you can take something and it's going to be acting everywhere and where you're thinking it's going to act is kind of crazy, because it really, the body is following its own rules about where it takes things and how it uses things. And so for that reason, a lot of the original research in the oxalate field was kidney stone doctors. And so what they were trying to do is get you to retain more of the oxalate in the gut. And to do that, they were wanting to bind it and make it where it was like a salt, and it would stay in your gut. And then when it got to your colon, it wouldn't be absorbed. So when it's free and it's not connected to a mineral, then that's when it's more likely to be absorbed back into your system where it can cause damage. Okay, so that's a really important concept. It's also very important to understand that when you have like magnesium citrate or calcium citrate, those things, they're salts. So that when it dissolves, then half of it goes this way and half of it goes that way, and it's no longer whatever you gave. Now, citric acid specifically has been recognized as something that will prevent stone formation. And so the oxalate researchers who are looking at kidney stones are very into using that form, because they think, well, actually they know that people that tend to have kidney stones have very low urinary citric acid. And so they're thinking, oh, well, if we give you more dietary citric acid, then that's going to, decrease the amount of stones that you make. But you really have to make a distinction between what's happening with the oxalate, it's going to affect your whole body, and what's happening to your oxalate that is affecting stone formation. And a lot of the time on this, it's very wise to look at family risks. Like, do you have people for 3 generations that have had kidney stones? Because that means you probably have some kind of genetic something or other, or even the diet that you've been eating may be making it more likely that you're you're going to develop that problem. But just understand that it's not just an issue of kidney stones, and that if you only look at the literature that's looking at kidney stones, then you're going to kind of misunderstand all of the implications of what you're taking. And oxalate is not detoxed, okay? There is no evidence at all that it uses any phase 2 process, because it doesn't need it. The phase 2 processes are for secretion and for making a fat soluble something into a water soluble something. That's not the situation with oxalate. Oxalate is not a fat soluble thing that needs to be turned into a water soluble thing. Okay, so that's kind of really important in getting, past all the talking out there on the internet that the way you get rid of everything is detox, detox, detox. And they're always thinking about introducing something to you to make that detox happen. That's really, the body gets rid of oxalate if it gets half a chance. It's not like it needs a lot of help. It just needs you to quit loading it in there. Okay.
Monique?
What I was going to say is that I'm going to use an example from how we started with this diet to some degree, which is oxalate, as Susan was saying, is going to potentially bind with these positive minerals, calcium, magnesium, and I refer to them as preferred dance partners. So if you think of them as kind of getting together on the dance floor and then they're going to leave together. And like usually the kidneys are going to do the lion's share of that work, because the kidneys are filtering the bloodstream, and so they're going to be getting these oxalates out. But what happens then is you're losing calcium or magnesium, which might have been otherwise available to the body because it's been bound to oxalate, and then it leaves. And so one of the things I'd say about this whole business of using minerals is that when we first started this diet in my family, we started with mineral supplements as sort of a baseline to start, because I just assumed, given how oxalate functions as a chemical, that we would be probably deficient in some of these minerals. And so the idea of taking things like magnesium and calcium is going to be useful from multiple aspects. One, you're likely deficient. Not absolutely, I can't say that for absolutely for sure, but if you've got a lot of high oxalate in your diet, it's quite possible that you don't have the level of minerals that you might want to have in order to be healthy. And the other thing is, you almost want oxalate to bind with certain minerals and not other ones, because it's a little bit easier for your body to get rid of it. So rather than having it meet up with calcium, where it creates that insoluble bond, and you can get kidney stones more likely if you've got calcium oxalate available, maybe what you want is for it to meet up with magnesium, and magnesium oxalate doesn't create kidney stones in the same way. And so, there's a lot of like nuanced things that we might want to think about when we're thinking about these minerals, and also think about what they're bound to, because as Susan was saying as well, citrate is related to, lower incidence of kidney stones. So it's helping to keep the oxalate dissolved and in the urine, as opposed to precipitating out as stones. But not everybody does well with citrate forms. So things like a bicarb form of something can be really helpful, because bicarbonate is one of the things that can also be affected by oxalate. And and things like Epsom salts. That's why we recommend things like Epsom salts, because oxalate can be disrupting sulfate chemistry, because the cell transporters that move, that I bless Susan for having taught me this. The cell transporters that move sulfate can also move oxalate. And so what you want is to provide more of what the body actually needs. And that this can be so helpful to have some additional sulfate available to the body. And with magnesium, where, you know, again, magnesium is one of the minerals that we can be short in. So, you know, this is another one of those places where it's not necessarily one size fits all. You might benefit from different kinds of minerals, depending upon what your individual needs are. You might benefit from different forms because maybe that mineral is bound to something else that can be helpful in the body. And so the, you know, when to use which and does it liberate oxalate may depend on where it's going to be used in your metabolism. So there's lots of things here, but it really reaffirms why go start slow with small doses, go slowly, because again, as Susan was saying, our body's managing a lot of its functions on its own without our conscious intervention. And so we don't necessarily know where our body's going to say that this particular resource is going to be used. And we don't know what necessarily the downstream work is going to be from where this resource gets used. And so if you start with small amounts and observe what's happening, it gives you a better chance of picking a mineral form or a dose, which is going to allow your body to do positive things for you. And getting back to what Patricia said about preserving your balance, this is really about homeostasis. Your body's attempted to create a homeostasis with the kind of diet that's been coming in. So now you're giving it some nutrients. That's great. But you don't want to disturb that homeostasis so much that you upset the apple cart. You want to, as Patricia was saying, inch up slowly, one step at a time, so that think of it a little bit like land where there's been drought and you want to bring water in. You want to bring water in a little at a time. Why? Otherwise you get flood because the land can't handle it. So what we're trying to do is give your body some nutrients and maybe start to slowly open up functions which have been restricted, either because of insufficiency or because of direct disruption by oxalate or whatever bits and pieces may have been going on. And so that's a careful, cautious approach, not a, oh, wow, calcium citrate's really good for us, so I'm going to start on 500 milligrams of it or 1,000 milligrams of it a day. No. Like if citrate's going to give you some benefits, that's great, but start small. If calcium's what you need, start small. Think about what works for you and what doesn't. Maybe consider some of your basic tendencies. In my case, I had a basic tendency, for instance, to constipation. Am I going to take calcium? No, I'm not, because calcium's going to slow the bowel down and then I've got more problems. I focused on magnesium first and only took smaller amounts of calcium. So there's things like that which may be really good basics. If you have a tendency to diarrhea, like my mother, who's also on this diet, do I give her magnesium first? No, I didn't. I gave her calcium first because she needed to slow things down a little. So in some cases, there can be things like that we have to keep in mind too. I'm going to let somebody take over because I'm going to keep spinning through the same points. I think I saw Carla's hand first, so I'll let Carla go, and then we'll pass to Susan.
2 points. One, if you can't tolerate citrate, at least for magnesium, taurate is a good form because it also inhibits that crystal stone formation but it doesn't tend to irritate the gut quite like citrate. And that's the form we use because, my son doesn't do well with citrate. We found that out fairly early. And since I don't want 10,000 forms of magnesium in my house, I take it, the husband and I take it too, and it works, and it works fine. The second thing about going slow, perfect example. When we started my son on Epsom salts, the general recommendation was like 2 cups of Epsom salt in a bath. We started with a half cup, thinking that was, I learned with him that you have to go fairly slow on supplements, and on some he just doesn't, he just didn't react really good to a standard dose. So we went, you know what, we'll do a half cup. It's supposed to be calming. Half cup in a bath, that kid was running around the house like the Energizer Bunny all night long. The husband was like, calming? I thought this was supposed to relax him. None of us got any sleep that night. We ended up having to go a tablespoon in not a foot bath, but a regular bath, and then gradually work him up. And I'm not sure if it was, the body saying, ooh, sulfate, and just too much of a good thing, or if it was, ooh, magnesium, too much of a good thing. But, there's a good reason to start very slow. And what that's going to be individual. Some people were telling me, tablespoon just doesn't do it. Well, guess what? I tried a quarter cup, same bloody thing. It took 6 months to get him up to a half cup, and another 6 months to get him up to a cup. We've never made it to the 2-3 cup. I don't even want to go there. At this point, a cup once or twice a week works for him just fine. And he's not up all night, but I mean, it was crazy. So yeah, there's a good reason to go slow.
Yeah.
Yes, Susan.
That argues for never, ever trying Epsom salts therapy at night the first time. Don't do that. Try it in the morning the first time, because you never know if you have a child, or if you're talking about yourself, are going to be somebody that gets super stimulated by it. Or, I mean, the first time I had Epsom salts, I slept I was like, is this what other people experience when they sleep? Oh my gosh, this is great. So for me, I was the opposite. But we've talked to something like 70 or 80,000 people now, and so we've heard all sorts of stories. I will say that on the citric acid, the people that we have heard complaints about the most regarding pain after taking some form of citric acid is people that have some sort of active inflammation going on, like interstitial cystitis or vulvodynia or something like that. They are the ones that tend to not do well with the citric acid form. And also, Carla, I don't know if you've run into this yet, but taurine's just really good to correct some of the damages that happened with oxalate. So it has its own merit. It's not just that it's the other, part of the molecule. It can have some beneficial effects of its own. And so that's certainly worth exploring for some people.
It's very calming. That's what we found.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a whole lot of research about like things that happen with the heart. And some of you may not be aware of this, but people who have primary hyperoxaluria, where the body is making this excess oxalate, the second organ most commonly seriously affected by this is the heart, because the heart muscle, unlike other muscles, can kind of accumulate this oxalate. And they know that after they do a liver transplant for somebody whose big source of oxalate is their liver, once they do the liver transplant, they've seen the level of crystals in the heart go down and then the heart function increase. So don't always think that if you have a heart condition that it has to be some unrelated something or other. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, there certainly has not been enough research on that, because people basically assumed the only people that had that issue were the people with the primary hyperoxaluria. And that's really rare. And I've had so many people upset because their oxalate was high on an oat, and they say, oh my gosh, I have primary hyperoxaluria. We need to understand that that genetic disorder is very rare. It's like 1 to 3 per million people. It's more likely that you need to look at something as ordinary as whether you're eating spinach. So that's just a little warning out there. Don't get alarmed until you have a good reason. Talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about in that area. And if your doctor doesn't know any more than whatever he gets on the organic acid test, seek some information from a professional that has a little bit more specific information about oxalate.
Absolutely. Now we have a couple of add-on questions to this topic. We have from Kelly Cryer that says, on the current question being discussed, is it correct to assume some of these heavy metals in the body might be bound to oxalate, which makes trying to predict what will happen as we try to mobilize them both even trickier? Yes.
I can address that in a sense. Kidney stones, for instance, are very messy things. They're not just pure calcium oxalate. They have all kinds of proteins in them. And when I went to an oxalate conference, they showed where they used EDTA to strip out the calcium. And then what they had left was a whole bunch of protein in these crystals. And so please don't think that all of this is nice and neat, because it's not. It's messy. And the level of minerals that you have in your system, if you have a lot of something around in your system and it's there, it's going to become part of that messy situation. But there is a possibility that, as you're dumping and we're actually releasing some of the oxalate that may have been in a more mineralized form, that may release part of the minerals. I mean, a lot of it's going to be calcium and zinc and manganese and magnesium and things like that. But I think just because of the timing of when people got interested in different things, that a lot of people really thought, the mercury and they're basically mercury, copper, and cadmium are the big, ones that people worry about the most. And if they're there, they may actually get incorporated into something, like a kidney stone. But your kidneys are not the only place it went. So it's complicated, and there hasn't been much research that looks at the whole body.
Yeah, so it is a messy process, just to answer that question. It is a very messy and tricky question. Some of I would just wanted to add something, because a lot of people, I don't want people to feel like they need to be afraid of the citrate or of the bicarbonate, or that it's not a necessary component of the diet. I think it would be really important to include those minerals and just try it out, small doses, and just test the waters and see how it goes. And another thing, one of the things that really helped us with the whole mineral availability is that I used to make shot glass with something like apple juice or pear juice or something like that, and put a little bit, like half capsule at the beginning or something, or of calcium citrate and magnesium citrate in the shot glass. And I would give it to my kids with a straw, so that when I was mixing it and whatever, they would drink it through the straw. And of course, what is the first thing that went in? The powders that were in the bottom. So that is just a really, quick tidbit of something that can help. In our case, we had very, very severe leaky gut, because of, you could see just through her intolerances test that everything was just passing through like a colander. So for us, the calcium citrate was really good, because the citrate part kept the oxalate from crystallizing, but the calcium 20 minutes before the meal provided that calcium that the tight junctions needed, to keep them tight. So it's, we're going to be talking about all these themes more over and over in different contexts and whatever. But I think the message that you need to take is that you can, start including these mineral options and start documenting how you're feeling, and, and start, if things are going well, start increasing a little bit of dosage and start seeing, how you start to take control of your own chemistry and listening to those signals within your body. So, yes.
I would just like to address why we soak in Epsom salts and we don't take it orally. It is true that the gastrointestinal tract has a whole lot of sulfate that does a lot of things in very complicated molecules. Like a lot of the slipperiness of the gut and the way that things kind of slip through has a lot to do with this negative charge that is provided by sulfate that's on these very complicated molecules. And I found out that when the immune system is activated, sometimes it chops it off and then redistributes that sulfate. So that might be for the benefit of the immune system. But what we're saying is the body may interpret excess sulfate in your gut as being an infection, or because it uses that as part of its way of handling infection. And so it just doesn't make very good sense to swallow it, and it tastes terrible anyway. So I just thought I would throw that out, because some of you may be tempted thinking, oh, well, I just need to take everything orally. Not necessarily.
Great. We have another short question that it is from Kelsey Alwyn, and it says, is the level of oxalate directly linked to the level of potassium in plants? I don't think so.
I would like to know, since you have that question, if you would contact me later and tell me why you were thinking that, because it might be a good idea that needs to be explored, but I have not heard that. A lot of the conferences that I went to when we started this project 17 years ago had botanists, and they were talking about how oxalate behaves in plants, but I don't remember anybody ever talking about that.
Talking specifically about potassium, I was thinking about the same thing, because I know that oxalate in the plant, it's like the bones for our body. So the bones for our body is where we keep our calcium reserve. And plants keep their calcium reserve in oxalate crystals. So, but not potassium that I can recall. So yes, so if you want to contact Susan directly, if you have, more details, then
Plants keep oxalate mainly in what we call idioblasts. So they actually have a cell type that accumulates the oxalate. Now that's not completely everywhere. I went to one, there was a poster at one of the original oxalate conferences I went to, and it was about kiwi fruit. And it was really interesting because what they found is you couldn't say kiwi stores oxalate in the skin or the pulp or the this or the that, because they found that it differed a lot by variety. And so, we're very inclined to want it to be simple, but it isn't always simple.
yeah. So Kelly responded and said, would it be more likely to be related to the calcium level in plants, since we know oxalate is used to regulate calcium? I don't think anybody knows, to tell you the truth. So
Well, they do know that one of the things that plants do is they secrete oxalate into the soil so that it can grab minerals, and I'm putting that in the plural because it's not just calcium, it's all kinds of minerals.
that's
And
right.
then they're
Through
using
the
that.
mycelium and other bacteria that are in the ground so that the plant can absorb the nutrients. That's correct.
Right. And so you've got to think about the life of a plant is really different from us. I mean, we're like always putting things in our mouths, and if you're a fish, you're probably, water is such a big part of your environment that maybe you do a whole lot more through skin, or if you're a frog or a tadpole or something. So you have to think about what kind of organism you're talking about, how it's going to be utilizing this in a different way.
Okay, well, it's been a great conversation. We have one last question, and then we're just going to, Kelsey just made another comment. People with chronic kidney disease are told to reduce potassium. Looking at the list of high potassium plants like spinach looks a lot like a list of high oxalates. This was just curiosity about why a high potassium plant is also high oxalates.
Well, there are certain changes that occur as your kidneys stop to function. And so you have to be really careful about looking at the advice that is given for conditions like chronic kidney disease, because part of it is because the kidney's just like not doing what it's supposed to do. So we can't necessarily take the advice that comes from that field and try to apply it sort of universally.
Yeah.
So just be careful about that.
And
There are definitely high oxalate plants that do not have a lot of potassium as well. So it's not like you can just say if it's high, it's not a simple pattern.
yeah. Okay, the last question is from Ruben G, and it says, are the symptoms from dumping the same as symptoms you get from eating high oxalate foods in a low oxalate diet? So how can you know in a certain moment whether you're dumping or you have transgressed your diet?
If you've transgressed your diet,
You're dumping.
yeah, like the challenge here is that if you have too much oxalate in circulation, you have too much oxalate in circulation, and you're not necessarily going to be able to tell where the oxalate came from if you're both eating oxalate or still eating high oxalate foods and you're having some intermittent dumping. And if I look back to where my health was when I started this diet, I was eating such a high oxalate diet, sometimes like the bucket just overflowed basically. And it wasn't that I was deliberately reducing my oxalate and dumping for that reason. So when you've got both transgressions, in the sense of, eating high oxalate foods, but you're coming down enough that you could be dumping as well, you really can't absolutely say for sure where that oxalate is coming from. Later on, I think you can probably be a little clearer, like, my diet's been consistently low for a long time. It's not likely that I've been eating something that's high oxalate, but if you're eating something new, you might have to go looking, right? So I have had the odd surprise where I found something that I didn't think was high oxalate, but it turned out to be high oxalate. But that's not so likely as you go along. But initially, like in the first few months while you're doing the diet and you're still reducing oxalate, I'm not sure you can say where it's coming from for sure.
And also just give me a second, Susan. And also, I just had that situation. I've been low oxalate for the better part of 15, 16 years or something. And I went to Amsterdam to visit a friend. And I stayed over, and it turned out that she was like in the middle of a golf course, and there was nothing to eat in her house but spinach and a tiny little bit of fish. And I said, well, I've been low oxalate all this time. It's all in your head. It's not going to do you anything once, you're not going to start making this whole mess, whatever. And I ate not once, but 3 servings, because that's literally all she had to eat, in that weekend. Not when I came back. So I was there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Monday, I wasn't feeling too good, but Tuesday, I was in pain. I was miserable. My blood pressure was in the roof. I had, my kidneys were sore, and I was miserable. I just didn't want, I just wanted to be in bed and whatever. So it was a very clear thing. Now, is that different from when I was dumping? No, it was probably worse, but it was just wild and really terrible. My brain fog was horrible. And I actually had to ask these ladies to give me, the rundown, dumbed down, brain fog, quick fixes, because I was just not thinking clearly. So we just have to be careful in general and just consider it, what it is. It is a toxin. It is not something that is meant to be circulating around in our body.
And when it's there and it's available and it is circulating around in our body, if you've got vulnerabilities, it's going to trigger them, whether it's from your recent chocolate experience, which every once in a while I get sucked into with the same sort of thought process. I've been away from this for so long. It's just a little, oh gosh. Or, or whether it's the last compartment in your body, which is giving up oxalate. Either way, once it's in the bloodstream and it has another kick at the can, your symptoms may look very similar between dumping and an infraction.
That's what we found. We've fallen off the wagon once or twice. The sun has fallen off of it more than once. And yeah, it pretty much, for us, it feels pretty much the same.
Yeah, my daughter and son, same thing. If the sun falls off, asthma. It's just when he starts wheezing, I go, okay, what you been doing? Anyway, it's Susan's turn.
Well, I have a more unusual circumstance because I have multiple sclerosis, which is, I think, very definitely, mitochondrially related. And so when I end up having this day or two after I visited somebody, oxalate crisis, I'm more likely to have very weakened muscles. And if you look in the literature, that is what most of the science is looking at. What happens at a cellular level is that it's looking at mitochondrial dysfunction. So if you're in that camp like I am, just know you're not alone, and that there are other people that that's more of an issue.
With that, ladies, lovely ladies, and everybody that's watching us, we are going to close this session. We are really happy to have these, this little chat time where we can answer questions. And I think it's very it's interactive in the sense of, we're reading your questions and we're interacting with whatever you're saying. It's a different way of presenting than just responding to a post, and we're hoping that you like it. We will remind you, if you haven't, go ahead and subscribe in the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is going to have all of these conversations with hopefully very good descriptions of what topics are touched in each one of these videos. And hopefully it's going to be, something useful for everybody. And I thank my co-wizards, Susan, Monique, and Carla, to be here and just giving us, their time and their expertise and everything, with a lot. And it's really a mission of love more than anything. And next week, next Monday, we're going to be looking at some recipe hacks. So what are our favorite recipe hacks? What are we doing, if we love mashed potatoes? What are we doing if we have all these different things? So we'll be just sharing some of our best tips and tricks, and we hope you join us. And just as a last comment, I think Monique has something to share. If you want to have a consult, either with Monique, with Susan, or with me, in case you have somebody on the autism spectrum, you can contact us, and we're just going to put like a little page on the screen so that you have the information on how to
Find us.
How to find us. Thank you.
Okay,
That was
so
easy.
I've got the ability to share my screen here, so I'll do that. So how to contact us. Monique Attinger. I put myself first because it's alphabetical, so it's an alphabetical list, but it's a little self-serving. I'll have to do it the other way around next time. Anyway, you can reach me at Monique at Low Ox Coach. I do nutritional consulting with people, help you to work through the issues that may be coming up as you're reducing oxalate, talk about nutrition, your variety in your diet, recipes, the whole aspect of trying to tailor your diet so that you're going to feel as well as you can while you're going through this process of trying to reduce oxalate. So happy to help. Patricia, who will be helping people who are dealing with the behavioral side of things. She can also talk about the diet, but how do you implement these changes? What do you do if you have special challenges, like kids who don't eat certain textures or having other kinds of problems with implementing diet? Patricia has a lot of skin in the game on that one, and she's also been doing this kind of consulting for a long time. We have our own Susan Owens, who, if you have an oat test and you want to understand more of what essentially is going on under the hood by having a more in-depth analysis of that oat test, Susan is your gal. She will also be able to talk to you about where you may have some nutrients, which would be of more importance for you. So bringing in the genetic aspects. So Susan has skills that are uniquely helpful if you're really dealing with a more complicated situation, or where you might be an endogenous oxalate producer. And as we said, Carla, who is in the process of finishing up her PhD and is kind of up to her eyeballs in alligators at the moment, is not currently taking clients, but she will be. There will be more information to come. If you're interested in working with any of us, you can approach us directly. And you can also, ask if you need more information on how to reach us, you can ask through the Triangle Oxalates group, and one of our moderators or admins will be happy to help you.
Perfect.
Okay.
Can I say something?
And yeah, go ahead, Susan.
I just wanted to give a plug to you, Patricia, because in years past, she was, I think it's an RD specialist. Isn't that what you call it?
An RDI, yeah.
RDI. Okay.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of, I've been working a lot with families on the spectrum, basically on the behavioral side and developmental and cognitive side. But I'm also working a lot now with families, just working on quality of life for everybody, not just child on the spectrum, but mom, dad, siblings, grandparents, uncles and aunts, schools and whatever. So my focus now is really on quality of life and of self-care for the caregiver. So I'm doing a lot of work around those issues, but I'm more than willing to share whatever experience I might, you might find useful on your low oxalate journey.
Well, I mean, if you have some weird, like, I don't understand why my body works this way, or why I can't walk, or, I mean, things like that. She's been more into the observing people in motion. And so those sorts of issues, even if they're not on the spectrum, they still might be something that she could help you with. So I just thought I'd throw that out because you wouldn't know that.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you added that, because we want people to understand what they can access in terms of skill sets and things among us all. So this is excellent.
So that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you then next week for another hour with the Wizards of Ox. So I hope you have an excellent week. You have lots of health. Remember to keep your balance, and we'll see you next week.